Welcome to Legacy Therapy, the podcast that will teach you, in bite-sized chunks, how to leave a stress-free legacy so loved ones can focus on people, not paperwork, when you become ill or pass away. Here is your host and financial advocate, Stacy Golden-Lisnock.
Okay, and welcome to this episode of Legacy Therapy, Planning Techniques for a Stress-Free Legacy. And today I have with me Laura Thatcher. And Laura, I don't have your bio in front of me at the moment, so I'm going to ask you to give us a little bit of background. It was very interesting what happened in your life and how you became an estate planning attorney here in Southern California. So I'm going to let you go ahead and tell us about you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. Do you want me to go back to the childhood story when I wanted to be a pediatrician, or shall we jump forward a little bit to where I'm actually practicing law?
Yeah, let's go to the law part, like how you went from, you were a litigator, I think you said, and then you switched over to the estate planning side, which is what we're going to talk about today, being that this is legacy therapy and planning techniques for a stress-free legacy. And I love that we're going to talk about the guardianship issue and how children can't own assets. We're going to talk about some things that I think are really going to be very interesting to our listeners. But I want to kind of know about your background a little first.
Absolutely. So when I went to law school, my original goal was to be an environmental attorney. And when I came out of law school, the job I got was in car accident defense. It's amazing how life takes these twists and turns that we don't expect. So after a few years, I transitioned from litigation over car accidents to construction defect litigation. And I was a practicing litigation attorney in the construction defect realm for another 10 years. And then in 2009, my father passed away after a long bout with cancer. And at his funeral, his work colleagues and the people in his life spoke about him and the difference that he made in their lives professionally. And he was an engineer. He was not a position that you think of as the super most caring or nurturing, but my dad had this profound impact on the lives of people that he worked with. And I looked at myself and my job, and I felt like I was more of a cog in a wheel than making an actual difference in people's lives. And this was in early 2009, right after the bottom fell out of the real estate market. Remember, I was a construction defect litigation attorney. So when people aren't building houses, they're not suing over houses that have problems. And I got laid off. I like to joke that along most people, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to prioritize and to figure out what was important to me. And for me, that was my family. And in my parents, I had an amazing example. Back when I was in law school, my parents dragged me to their estate planning attorney, and they prepared their estate plan. And they updated it over the years, and they moved different states and updated it for where they were living in the various states, because they moved around quite a bit when I was in law school. But eventually, when my dad passed away, everything was planned out, and my parents had all their ducks in a row. And all my mom and I had to do when dad died was grieve. And really, that was enough.
I mean, and that's the goal here. That's the great story, but it's so rare to hear that story.
Exactly. And on the side for years, I had been drafting prenuptial agreements for friends and wills. And so after dad died, I looked at the legacy that they had left me of this proper planning. And my mother is still alive, so I didn't get a monetary legacy, but I got an example. And I could use that example to help other people have what my mother and I had. And so that's what I've been doing since 2009. And I've gone from feeling like a cog in a machine to feeling like I make a difference in my clients' lives.
Yeah, and this is something everybody should be considering. And I found you actually on Facebook, where you had posted an article on choosing a guardian for your children, which is something that is one of the chapters of my course talks about in depth, because so many young families haven't done this, and it could be quite devastating if there is a death for the child, to have to not really have a place and nothing set up in advance. So I wanted to get your perspective on that. And I know it's important to you, because that was something that we've talked about a little bit. So
yeah, well, I think back when my oldest son is 17. And when he was born, and when I went back to work, I was riding up in the elevator, and I worked in the New York Life building, and I'm riding up in the elevator with a woman who's a New York Life agent. And this was, I think it was literally a day or two after I'd gotten back from my first maternity leave. And in speaking with this wonderful woman, I realized how much I needed to do to be a responsible mother. And one of those things, thank you to the life insurance agent, was get enough life insurance so that my children could be monetarily taken care of if something happened to me and my husband. And then my husband and I talked for years about needing an estate plan. When I was in a mommy and me class, and remember, I'm a construction defect attorney at this time. I'm in a mommy and me class, and there's an estate planning attorney who comes to speak with us. And we're sitting, and I've got my baby on my lap, and she's talking about the need to take care of our families and prepare a trust. And then someone asked the dreaded question, how much does it cost? And I said, well, that's not for me. It was, at the time, having just come off maternity leave, there was no way that the idea of spending that much money terrified me. So for years, my husband and I didn't do anything. And then flash forward a few years more, and I decided to hang out my own shingle doing estate planning. And okay, so now I can write my own. And luckily, I had the training and the ability to craft that plan for my family. But the sticky part then was my husband and I couldn't agree on who we wanted to take care of our children. We fought for 2 years.
that's not an uncommon story, because I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of that as well. In my case, we never came to an agreement, and my kids are, well past the age where they need to have a guardian. But I figure, like, well, the chances are slim. But that's only good if it works out that way. For the few that it does, devastating if they don't have somebody named, right? Like, what could happen?
Well, the worst thing that could happen is your children can end up in foster care, whether it's for a night or long term. If I haven't personally experienced this, but I read an article by a woman talking about needing to prepare your estate plan. And she told this story of a married couple with children at home with a babysitter. The married couple was in a car accident, and the police came and knocked on the door, and there's a teenage babysitter at home with these 2 young children. And the teenage babysitter didn't know who to call, what to do. So the police swooped the kids up and took them to Child Protective Services, and they were in foster care for, luckily, eventually family members were found, but they had to, who knows what can happen to your children in homes that you yourself haven't vetted. And that leads me to, recommending to my clients to just, one, to have a proper estate plan, and we'll get into the details of that, but also to make sure to leave instructions with your babysitter. Who to call if who to call if something happens to me, rather than the police or social services.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And it's like you talk about a teenage babysitter, which, you figure they're not going to know a whole lot, but even if you had somebody even more mature, that doesn't happen in one's life, like, ever, right? Like, you wouldn't know what to do in that scenario. And it's sort of like leaving those instructions would be a little bit, I don't know, out there. Maybe you're having a premonition of this bad thing happening or something like that. So I think that it's a good idea to have just like an emergency contact list on the refrigerator, maybe on the side of the refrigerator, and then just always point that out to whomever is there when you're not there. Say, hey, there's an emergency list on the fridge. If anything happens, if the water pump pipe breaks or something happens that you need emergency, go to that list first, and then the emergency contacts would be on there.
Yes, and I actually have a PDF version of that I provide to my clients, and you can fill it out every time you go out. This is where I'll be. These are the people who are taking care of my children, and here are my children. They're allergic to eggs, and you can put those details on that form. I don't know why I thought of eggs just then.
Yeah,
that's what popped into my head.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent idea. It's kind of like when you have those temporary, if your kid's traveling with somebody else or whatever it is, when you have to give them the right to take them to the hospital, medical, and all that. So I don't think people realize how restricted the laws are. You just figure, I have a kid that needs medical attention, I would just run them to the emergency room, and it's just like, aha. I don't know what really happens if they're going to just ignore the kid because you're not the parent. But why would you take the chance?
Exactly.
You could run into like somebody that's.
I do think that hospitals have to treat life-threatening situations, but my understanding, and my medical degree is from Grey's Anatomy, so don't take medical advice from me.
Exactly.
But I do have a law degree from Loyola Law School here in Los Angeles. So you can take legal advice from me.
Yeah, that's handy. So what is your, I noticed in your download, which maybe we can offer up as something that people could get from you. I'm not sure where they would get it. How would they get that if they want that download on how to pick a guardian?
Well, I can provide a link to my website, and people can go on there and download it.
Okay.
We probably should have discussed this earlier, but can we put that in show notes?
Yeah, it could be in the show notes, but and it's not a difficult one to remember though either, right? It's just, isn't it? Tell them what your website.
Well, my website is www.Thatcher, T as in Tom, HATCHER, lawgroup.com.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's good. So then there's this whole thing. And in that you offer a form that can be notarized. I actually have it right here.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on that? Is that just like a quick fix? I mean, we don't want people to think that, oh, I've got it done now that I saw Laura or talked to Laura or heard Laura on Stacy's show. This nomination of guardians form, is very handy. And you have the notarization form to go with it. But what does that really, what does that really mean?
Well, I think of it as the first step on a ladder. If you do nothing else, put in writing who you want to take care of your children. I personally think it's a great idea to have it notarized, but actually in California, to nominate a guardian for your children, it just has to be something in writing that is signed and dated. So that is the minimum. And take out a piece of paper. If I die while my child John Smith is a minor, I want Jane Doe to be the guardian. Signed, Laura Thatcher, December 11th, 2020. It can be that simple.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah, that's good to know, because I'll tell you, my granddaughter once, and my daughter and her husband were going to Mexico for something, an event. And I said, you really need to have something. So they did write something similar to what you're saying. Do they both need to sign it, both parents, or does it matter at them? Better than nothing. And then, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, because we talked about how my husband and I couldn't agree, and you and your husband couldn't agree. So I jokingly, and it's only semi-joking, I say whoever dies last wins. So if you can't agree with your spouse as to who should be your child's guardian, create your own list, both parents, and sign it, and then the survivor's list wins. It's left a little bit to chance that way, but I figure my choice is my choice, and my husband's choice is his choice, and he loves our children as much as I love my children. So even though I disagree, his choices aren't terrible. So that way we leave it a little bit up to fate. But again, something is better than nothing. The perfect thing is if both parents agree. If you can't agree, just create your own lists. It is so much better when we hit these roadblocks. And one of those big roadblocks is my spouse and I don't agree on who takes care of the kids. Then don't agree. Don't let that prevent a plan to be in place. There, especially in estate planning, I think in all areas of life, but estate planning, there are so many roadblocks that cause people to not put their plan together. And the first is, if I prepare my plan, it means I'm going to die. No, it does not mean you're going to die. It means that if you die, you have a plan in place. It's not, creating that document is not going to hasten your death.
Yeah, I had that same experience in life insurance, because I was a financial advisor for over 30 years, and I have a life insurance license for even longer than that. And that was in the early days. I would come across that way more often than I do now, because I think just people mature over the years, and seeing what does happen and how families are left destitute, and they're having to ask for handouts, and GoFundMe accounts are opened on their behalf, and that's just because they didn't take care of their own business. And it's a little bit of a problem for everybody, right? And it doesn't need to happen, because life insurance is so inexpensive. The chances of you actually passing away early are slim, but it does happen to 1% to 2% of the people holding those types of inexpensive policies.
I didn't realize the numbers were that low.
Cash in on them,
which is more proof that it only
they are for
happens
term
2%. Having that policy is not going to hasten your death.
That's right. That's right. And it just makes it like a safety net, because in this world and in this life, you have to have money to operate. And if you don't have money to operate, everything falls apart. So, I'm glad you brought up the life insurance thing. And I wanted to mention, I'm sorry.
I wanted you to go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Cool. All right. So, we talked a little bit about the guardian. So the guardian thing is real important. I just can't emphasize that enough. The guardian actually, though, you can't just legally just take somebody's kids. It's a legal process, right? You actually get paperwork, and the court actually has to sanction that you're the right person. And so how does that actually look? Like, does somebody, if somebody, like, let's say somebody's dies, and then they left their kids to their sister, and then their sister is like mourning the death of her sister, and now she's got her kids, and her whole life is totally turned around because now she's got these kids that she didn't have yesterday. At what point do you get the law the courts involved because you have somebody else's child that you really don't have legal rights over? How does that work?
So it probably should happen if you have the guardian nomination. What you do is you go to the probate court, at least here in California. It's probably a very similar process in other states, but each state in the United States has slightly different laws. And I'm a California attorney. I always like to give that disclaimer. So what happens is, let's assume that you have that guardian nomination. I've nominated my sister Jane to watch my children. My husband and I are in a car accident and we die. So Jane has this nomination. And now all that is a nomination. So what Jane does is she fills in a guardianship petition and brings it to the court. And then she files that with the court and then sends notice to all relatives within a certain degree. Adult siblings, she has to provide the names of siblings, aunts and uncles, grandparents. I think that's, if those are living, those are the only the requirement. And you provide notice. If no one objects, the court is going to grant the petition fairly automatically. In this time of COVID, hearing dates are taking a lot longer to get. Usually they're a month or so out or 2 out, and now they're 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 months out because of how backed up the court is. During this time, of course, the nominated guardian can still care for the child. And it is possible to get temporary papers authorizing and all the steps of caregiving, dealing with schools, handling doctors, and medical emergencies. But so if there's no objections, that petition is granted almost routinely. If there are objections, the court is going to look first to the nomination that the parents provided. And oftentimes I will recommend to my clients, if there's someone that they really do not want their children to be with, to actually include a sealed letter explaining their reasons. And if that person objects and fights and says, but no, I should be the guardian, that sealed letter can be provided to the court. And if that person does not object, that letter doesn't have to go anywhere. So it's a sort of a private way to make sure that your choices are met. Backing up a little bit to that guardian nomination, one of the things that I really strongly recommend is not just nominating my sister Jane. My sister Jane is fictional. But so I nominate Jane, but what if Jane is in the car accident with me? Then who? So what I always recommend is thinking about those permutations. If Jane is married, so Jane and Tarzan are married, and Jane's in the car accident with me. Did I name Jane and Tarzan together? So maybe Tarzan will be the guardian. But what if I only wanted Jane? So I have my clients think about these things, and I provide sort of explicit instructions. If not Jane, then not Tarzan, but my brother John. So I like to think about it in a sports analogy. You have your starting quarterback, but if he's injured on the field or if something happens, you have a second string quarterback, even a third and fourth string quarterback who can come up and take the place of that first string. And there goes my sports
that's
analogy.
A good analogy. Yeah.
I think that's about it for my sports.
That's really, yeah. Okay, well, that's cool. All right, well, I think that kind of wraps up. You know, I've always wondered about that, and so now I'm glad to actually have somebody that knows answer that question.
And
in my research too, I never thought of what happens in the divorce scenario. So let's say you did nominate, you know, Tarzan and Jane as a couple, and then they're divorced. Which one would they go with? Like how do you decide that? And is that something that you would want to have written out as well?
It's very much something that you would want to have written out. Most often, my clients will name the one of the people in the couple, not so that my kid, if I name Jane as a guardian, I only name Jane. I don't say Jane and Tarzan. It's just Jane. And I do not know where I came up with Tarzan as the name of the husband, but there we go.
I think it's a fictional character.
Yeah.
Which is good. So yeah, so instead of naming a couple, you're suggesting rather than naming a couple, just name one of the couple so that it doesn't become an issue if that one isn't available. And you know, did you, I'm sure this movie, Manchester by the Sea, did you see that?
I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh, wow. That's the what do I want to say? The guardianship surprise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you want to make sure that you get the person to agree ahead of time that this is something they're willing to do, not have it be sprung on them. They hear of your death, and then, oh, by the way, you were the ones listed as the parents. Here you go.
I was thinking
in this case, baby boom. Yeah.
Maybe I'm dating myself with Diane Keaton.
Yeah. There was another one that was it was two single people that were friends of this couple, independent of each other, and I think they tried to match them up, and they went on this date from hell, and then guess what? They get killed in a car accident. They have this baby, and now all of a sudden they're both named as the guardian, and so then it becomes this love story in the end. But they can't stand each other in the beginning. So there's some stories about.
I like that movie because although you don't really want that guardianship surprise, that particular movie handled the guardian nomination process and being vetted by social services, going to court. It actually handled it semi-accurately for a movie, which is rare. Usually you'll see those movies and it's the person's just the godparent, and the godparent gets the kid automatically.
What about godparents? Isn't that sort of like the unofficial, you're the godparent, so when you accept the godparenthood, you're sort of unofficially saying, yes, if something happens to you, I'm the one, or is it just something else?
Legally, no. Legally, the godparent is not the nominated guardian. It's evidence. I mean, if something were to happen to me and my child's and I did not have a plan in place, my children's godparent could go to court and say they named me as godparent. I am who they would have wanted. But it's not an automatic, and that is not the godparent does not have legal authority as a guardian.
Right.
And I should mention that there are two types of guardians. There's the guardian of the person, who is physically the person who takes care of the minor child. And then there's also something called the guardian of the estate. And that is the person who manages the money, my money for my children. Because children under the age of 18, or I should just say minors, are not allowed to own money. If they have a bank account, they have to have an adult named on that account as a financial guardian. So it's important to think not just about who's physically going to care for my children, but who's going to manage my money for my children. And there are actually several ways to do that. You can name a guardian of the estate, and you can also create a trust. And the trust is like, I have behind me a treasure chest. A trust is like a treasure chest that you store your assets inside of, and that can be used to, you name a trustee who looks after money for the children. And in order to have a trust and a trustee look after my money for my children, I don't have to go to court for that. That can be handled outside of court entirely. And that's one of the very nice things about trusts. And we can also, with a trust, rather than having my children get my money at 18, I can say when I think my children are mature enough to handle money on their own. And it's not 18.
Right. I know. And some of them, they say so much at this age and so much at that age and so much at another age and all that jazz. Well, this has been really great. I know we're kind of running out of time right now, but I think you touched on a lot of really important points of the guardianship thing for sure. And I'm hoping that people who do have young children take it to heart and realize that they are kind of leaving things up to fate. And that is not a good thing to do when your children's well-being is in jeopardy potentially. Now, we hope that this would never happen to be the case, but we have things just in case, a little safety net of life. And I think it's a real important safety net. You wouldn't want to be on a high-rise teeter-totter thing without some sort of way to catch yourself, on the way down. Anyway, with that said, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and being a guest. And people that want to get in touch with Laura, you can reach her at her off of her website, imagine, right? You told them, and I'll have it in the show notes. And then do you want to give out a phone number just so that people could jot it down?
Sure. It's 310-305-4646.
Oh, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Cool.
And they can reach me by email if they'd prefer at Laura, Laura, at Thatcher, again, T as in Tom, HATCHER, lawgroup.com. And that phone number receives text as well.
Oh, good. That's good to know. Thank you. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up for today, but thank you again so much. This has been one of those topics that I'm very passionate about. It is in one of the chapters and one of the lessons of the online course, Got It Together Emergency Info File. We go through all kinds of different scenarios there, the pro and con sheet, which is kind of what each parent would do, and, pick this person or pick that person, and what would be the pros and cons of each person and all that jazz. But you gave some very good tips and advice when you can't agree. And I think that's probably the big stopping point for a lot of couples. And so with that said, I want to invite everyone to visit the website, www.gotittogethernow.com, and check out the online course and see if that's something that you would like to do, because that will be a way to provide a stress-free legacy for your family. And there's nothing better, as Laura mentioned, than having a stress-free legacy like her father did for her and her mother. And then you have the time to grieve, which is really what you should be doing in the case when somebody does pass away, not having to be stressed out, looking for paperwork, dealing with courts, dealing with all kinds of things that you shouldn't have to be doing. And we don't even know what falls through the cracks and never gets discovered. So it's another big thing. So I'm Stacy Golden-Lisnock, your financial advocate, signing off until next time. And thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Legacy Therapy Podcast. If we hit it out of the park today and you learned at least one new thing to take action on in your own quest to planning the best legacy possible, then be sure to tell your friends, subscribe, and rate and review wherever you get your podcast. The show notes will provide the sites and information that were discussed today. You can get more great tips, resources, and inspiration by visiting our website legacytherapypodcast.com.